नमस्कार सभी को। आज के इस शुभ अवसर पर माननीय डॉक्टर गणेश जी शतावधानी हमारे बीच में उसी क्रम में आए हैं और मैं सभी को प्रणाम करता हूं। सभी को नाम से अलग अलग नहीं लेता, समय देर कर दिया हमने, क्षमा चाहता हूं उसके लिए। आज के विषय का जो प्रारंभ है, अध्यक्षता प्रोफेसर चंद्रकला पाड़िया जी करेंगे और राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान परिषद के अध्यक्ष प्रोफेसर एडीएन वाजपेयी जी इंट्रोडक्टरी रिमार्क देंगे। वोट ऑफ थैंक्स का कार्य इस बार प्रोफेसर गोविंद शर्मा जी को मिला है। प्रश्नोत्तरी का जो क्रम रहा है वही रहेगा और मैं वाजपेयी जी को आमंत्रित करता हूं कि इंट्रोडक्टरी रिमार्क दें। चंद्रकला पाड़िया जी के बारे में दो शब्द बता देंगे तो साथ में दोनों काम हो जाएगा जी।
वैसे आप परिचय मैडम पाड़िया का दे दें
जी,
ये भी क्रम में है, तो आप
जी
बता दीजिए, पहले परिचय करिए
जी।
उसके बाद मैं बोलूँगा।
Professor Chandrakala Padia is a name celebrated among us in every sense. She has been part and partial of this RSVP from the day one, and I have found according to all of us, we agree on that she has been a great scholar on a subject of social science related to study of ethics plus study of the old Shastras, especially Manusmriti and gender issues is her own forte. And she has been vice chancellor, as we have seen in the past. She has been very, very contributing to Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla also. She has been giving lectures throughout the globe. And she has been very, very well known for her contribution and affectionate behavior, love for the children of the classes of master and PhD program. I have happened to meet some of the PhD students of hers. They had such a high word about her. चंद्रकला जी, आपका परिचय बहुत छोटा रखा है देर होने के कारण। हम सब लोगों में आपकी प्रसिद्धि बहुत है। आपको नमस्कार करते हैं एंड वेरी वेरी ग्रेटफुल टू यू फॉर टेकिंग दिस जॉब ऑफ प्रेजाइडिंग ओवर टुडे। नाउ आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट प्रोफेसर वाजपेयी जी टू गिव द इंट्रोडक्टरी रिमार्क अबाउट दिस एंटायर प्रोग्राम एंड गणेश जी को मैं प्रणाम करता हूं उसके लिए।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद अमरजीत जी। बहुत सारी शक्तियाँ हमारे नियंत्रण से बाहर रहती हैं, इसमें कुछ कह नहीं सकते। और आदरणीय गणेश जी ने पिछली बार जो है वो काल और स्थान का विशेष महत्व बताया था, तो सबके साथ में हो सकता है कि ऐसी विशेष बात नहीं है। परम आदरणीय प्रोफेसर पीवी कृष्ण भट्ट जी, राजकुमार भाटिया जी, हमारे दोनों ही उपाध्यक्ष महोदय श्री प्रकाश मणि त्रिपाठी जयप्रसाद जी, शीला जी महासचिव, गोविंद शर्मा जी कोषाध्यक्ष और कार्य परिषद के समस्त हमारे सदस्यगण जो इस हमारी व्याख्यान श्रृंखला में सब लोग जुड़े हुए हैं, दूर दूर से लोग जुड़े हुए हैं, उन सबको मैं प्रणाम करता हूँ। आज की जो हमारी चेयरपर्सन है चंद्रकला पाड़िया जी, सूक्ष्म में भी बहुत विस्तार होता है और हम सभी लोग अणो रणियान महतो महियान में विश्वास करते हैं। चंद्रकला पाड़िया जी का सूक्ष्म में भी उतना ही संपूर्ण है और विस्तार में भी उतना ही संपूर्ण है। हम सभी की बड़ी आराध्या है। शतावधानी गणेश जी की व्याख्यान श्रृंखला हम लोगों ने एक महत्वाकांक्षी योजना के अंतर्गत प्रारंभ की है। इसके लिए हम सभी लोग आदरणीय पीवी कृष्ण भट्ट जी के आभारी हैं, अनुग्रहित हैं। जो लोग नए जुड़े हैं उनको थोड़ा सा संक्षेप में बता दूं कि शतावधानी आर गणेश जी स्वयं एक सशक्त ज्ञान के प्रतिस्वरूप हैं, तो पर्सोनिफाइड नॉलेज कह सकते हैं अंग्रेजी में। असाधारण विद्वान हैं, 18 भाषाओं के ज्ञाता हैं, 10,000 से अधिक घंटों तक व्याख्यान दिए हैं, 58 पुस्तकों के रचयिता हैं। किसी एक विषय पर एक साथ 100 श्लोकों की रचना कर सकते हैं। निषेधाक्षरी में एक अक्षर के बिना भी बहुत सारे श्लोकों की संरचना कर सकते हैं। ऐसे विद्वत व्यक्ति ने हम सबके लिए समय प्रदान किया है। हम उनके प्रति बहुत आभारी हैं, उनका स्वागत करते हैं, अभिनंदन करते हैं। शतावधानी गणेश जी विद्वान होने के साथ साथ में साधक हैं, तपस्वी हैं। और मैं इसलिए कह रहा हूँ कि जो साधक और तपस्वी विद्वान होता है उसमें वेद, मंत्र, श्लोक, ज्ञान अपने स्वरूप को स्वयं प्रकट करता है। बाकी जो चेष्टा से विद्वता अर्जित करते हैं वे अर्थ तक तो पहुंच जाएंगे, मर्म तक तो पहुंच जाएंगे, तत्व तक नहीं पहुंच सकते। तत्व ज्ञान स्वयं साधक और तपस्वी को ही प्रकट करता है। इसलिए मैं शतावधानी आर गणेश जी को एक असाधारण तपस्वी, साधक और ज्ञानवान व्यक्ति मानता हूँ। पिछले व्याख्यानों में उन्होंने भारतीय ज्ञान की परंपरा का जो मूल है उसको अभिव्यक्त किया। एक सुदृढ़ परंपरा का सुदृढ़ आधार हमारे सामने प्रस्तुत किया। वेदांत को लेकर के उन्होंने स्पष्ट मंतव्य दिया। भारतीय और पाश्चात्य दर्शन में अंतर स्पष्ट किया। पुस्तकों का भी उल्लेख किया, जैसे प्रोफेसर बताता है विद्यार्थियों को, आप बलदेव उपाध्याय की पुस्तक पढ़िए, चंद्र शर्मा की पुस्तक पढ़िए दर्शन के लिए। आपने पिछले व्याख्यान में वेदों, स्मृतियों, विभिन्न ग्रंथों में वर्ण की, आश्रम की, भाषा की, इसके कुछ संदर्भों की, कर्म कांडों की, परंपराओं की, मानव मूल्यों की, संस्कारों की, व्यक्ति, परिवार, समुदाय, समाज के बीच में जो वैज्ञानिक एकता है, काल और स्थान सापेक्ष लेते हुए उसका अद्भुत निरूपण आपने किया है। हम उसी भारतीय समाज विज्ञान के शोध या समाज विज्ञान के भारतीय शोध के भाग 2 पर आज हम उनका श्रवण करेंगे। जो हमारे औपचारिक अध्येता समाज विज्ञान के, वो जब शतावधानी गणेश जी का व्याख्यान सुनते हैं तो एडम स्मिथ की इकोनॉमिक्स की शब्दावली को अपने ध्यान में रखें, मैकियावेली के राजनीति शास्त्र को अपने मस्तिष्क में रखें, दुर्खैम के समाजशास्त्र को अपने मस्तिष्क में रखें। उसको रख कर के इनका जो ज्ञान प्राप्त होगा उसकी चरणी करें, उसकी चुगाली करें, उसको आत्मसात करें, फिर जो है नए कलेवर में अपने ज्ञान को प्रस्तुत करें। मैं इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ में आप सभी के प्रति आभार प्रकट करता हूँ, अनुग्रह व्यक्त करता हूँ। अमरजीव जी, आप विधिवत शतावधानी आर गणेश जी को आज के उद्बोधन के लिए आमंत्रित कीजिए।
जी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। डॉक्टर शतावधानी जी के बारे में वाजपेयी जी ने जितना भी कहा वो बहुत कम है। उनके ज्ञान गंगा में हम लोग कई दिनों से, कई सप्ताह से गोता लगा रहे हैं। Just with all politeness and humility invite Dr. Ganesh ji to come and deliver the lecture for the day. Namaskar, Ganesh ji. Please do come. Floor is yours. गणेश जी को संभवतः म्यूट करना है।
अनम्यूट कर दीजिए।
हाँ हाँ, अनम्यूट वो करेंगे, उनको मैं यहाँ से प्रयास कर रहा हूँ। उन्होंने अपनी ओर से किया हुआ है तो यहाँ से हम नहीं कर पा रहे। एक मिनट,
हो गए अनम्यूट। अब वो बोलेंगे तो सुनाई देगा
जी।
ओम तत्सत। महाकवि मुखाम्भोज मणिपंजर शारिकां चैतन्य जलधि ज्योत्स्नां देवीं वंदे सरस्वतीं। Good evening, salutations, namaskar. With this beautiful invocatory verse of a great poetess, Ganga Devi, from the period of early Vijayanagar, I am going to start this informal deliberation. I told that it will be continuation of the last session itself, sources of Indian sociology. Here, I have to mention that interdisciplinary approach is very much needed, especially in understanding our culture, and that has been the pallavi or the burden throughout these sessions. One example I shall give. How to understand men and women as individuals. It's a very big, difficult thing. And there is a popular book in English, an American book by name Men Are from Mars and Women Are from Venus. It's a very, very popular book written before few decades and still popular. There you can know some of the traits of men and some of the traits of women. Of course, a lot of debatable things are there. And yet, there are some such approaches in the West since many centuries. And our tradition also has enlisted several such features. As individuals, the nature of men and women. And there, our smritis and our other Shastras, to an extent, they will be helping. For that matter, how to know men and women at the physical level, we have Ayurveda. In the great Brihattari, the three great works of Charaka, Sushruta and Vagbhata, we have certain references, their physiology. And this is it has to be updated with the modern sciences of medicine and physiology. But the mind, the nature, the mentality, for that we have another science called Yoga Shastra. In Yoga Shastra, we can know something about Chitta Vritti. And more than this, we can know something about the physiology and mentality by learning lessons from Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra. There we have Stri Lakshana and Purusha Lakshana. We have one more work of the great scholar Varahamihira. In his Brihad Samhita, we have separate chapters. We have separate chapters devoted to men and women, Stri Prashamsa and Purusha Prashamsa. And we have one more dimension from Dehasamudrika of Samudra. And there we have Stri Lakshana and Purusha Lakshana. And we have works connected to Jyotisha. There we have Stri Lakshana and Purusha Lakshana. Again, these works of Samudra Bandha and then the works of people who are connecting with Jyotisha, today they are challenged to an extent, and yet they are very valuable from so many other aspects. And then we have features which are dealing with the Chitta Vritti, the mindset of men and women from Natya Shastra. Natya Shastra's 7th chapter is a great storehouse of psychology. And then we have from the Bhagavad Gita and from the Kapila Sankhya, Kapila Maharshi, who propounded Sankhya, there we have lot to deal with the Trigunas. And these Trigunas, they extend to not only mind, to body also. Because at the level of body, how these Trigunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, they manifest, and how they act upon the mind, and how they frame the mind, like that, these features can be known. It means you have to take inputs from Ayurveda, Jyotisha, and then Varahamihira, of course, come to the level of Jyotisha and other features, also general study. And then we have Yoga Shastra, then we have Vedanta Shastra, Bhagavad Gita, and then we have Natya Shastra. It means from 6 different directions, one has to arrive at a concrete picture of how our ancients, how our rishis, and how our scholars understood men and women. This is how we have to forge our new inputs for Indian sociology. If not, just confining ourselves to Dharma Shastra or Ratna Shastra is a very, very narrow and insufficient approach. Unfortunately, many people, with all well-meaning nature, they are constrained, they are restricted because of such insufficient approach. I don't say wrong approach. It's a very, very narrow and insufficient approach. For example, many people want to know about Indian psychology, and one and all rush to Patanjali Yoga Sutra. But the very nature of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, the very second sutra of Patanjali Yoga Shastra is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Means it is meant to seal the activity of mind, to pacify the mind that Shastra has originated. But psychology wants to know more about the activity of mind. There, it deals more with, though it is dealing with mind, it is more with the sense of insulating. But we have to know hyperactive mind also, very active mind also. For that, Patanjali Yoga Sutra is not sufficient. We have to go to Natya Shastra, because Natya Shastra is Chitta Vritti Vilasa. They are not opposed to each other, they are complementing. Western scholarship very easily jumps to the conclusion that they are opposed to each other. And narrow-minded Indian scholarship thinks that Natya Shastra is a taboo because our philosophers of a millennium or so have been always saying that poetry, art, and other things, they come in the way of spiritual development, so they have to be shunned. They have to be kept away. But how foolish it is. But the real Rishi Darshana is integration of this, everything. And that's why how Patanjali is a seer, is a Rishi, so is Bharata a Rishi. Both have been respected in our tradition. Then that being the case, people who want to know more about Indian psychology, they have to do greater work in Bharata's Natya Shastra. As I have read all the available commentaries on these two Shastras, the Yoga Shastra or the Natya Shastra, thoroughly going through the development of Natya Shastra in various forms, many works which have come based on Natya Shastra, whether it is Sagar Nandi's Natak Lakshana Kosha or Sharda Taniya's Bhava Prakashana or Bhojaraja's Shingara Prakasha or Gunachandra Ramachandra's Natya Darpana and Dhananjaya Dhanika Dasharupka and so many other works based on Natya Shastra. They give so much of information about Chitta Vritti. And even the practice of it can be seen. We may find very hard to meet one true yogi, but it is not that difficult to meet one true practitioner of Natya Shastra. We may get thousands and thousands of fake yogis, but we can very easily get at least handful of true practitioners of Natya Shastra. It means both in theory and practice, Natya Shastric approach is available in a dependable manner, but we cannot say so with Yoga Shastra. Why I am saying, with the resurgence of BJP government, many fake Indologists, many fake Indic study scholars have come to the scenario. Since 10-15 years, they are mushrooming like anything. Both within India and outside India, we see so many scholars. I need not mention their names. You yourself can identify many such people are there. They don't have any ABCD of Sanskrit learning. They don't have any ABCD of grassroots level of understanding Indian culture. They don't even have any practice of Kavya or Shastra. They don't even have any practice of Karma Kanda or Yoga Shastra. Why I am saying such people who don't have interdisciplinary approach and they are not well-rounded in scholarship, they try to compartmentalize things, and this way of pseudo-exclusivity of the first order has come to picture. But Sanatana Dharma is highly inclusive and multidisciplinary approach is the order Ekam Shastra Madhiyano Nagachet Shastra Nirnayam. If a person is learned in one subject, he is no learned. That is what it is being said. And that's why we have to go to other sources. I don't know, you people have to enlighten me because you people are the embodiment of the subject, sociology, and you should tell me to what extent, apart from the Smriti literature and the Arthashastric literature, how many other areas of learning from Indic lore have been exploited, have been utilized to study Indian sociology. If it has been done, I'm very, very happy. Certainly, they take inputs from Vedas and other Shastras, but as far as my knowledge goes, they are not caring to Kavya and Nataka literature. Because, you see, in the West, we don't have many Shastras like in India, which have been developed. We have so many Shastras. But in Greco-Latin literature, we don't have that many Shastras. We don't find an Natya Shastra there. We don't find a Samasutra there. We don't find a work like Gajashastra there, or a work like Ashwashastra there, something like that. There, the society has been studied profusely with respect to Kavya and Nataka. And hence, they could develop a sociology depending upon their environment. And there you can see so much of cultural study has been done on every poet. Fortunately, since a century or so in India too, so much of cultural study has been done on various Sanskrit poets and even Sanskrit Shastrakara. One of the towering names in that is Vasudev Sharan Agrawal, a very great scholar. Vasudev Sharan Agrawal was a very great Sanskrit scholar, stayed in Varanasi, and he was a mentor. He was the mentor to Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan ji, who recently left us. Kapila Vatsyayan used to remember him with very great reverence, and many very good scholars were trained by him. And Vasudev Sharan Agrawal ji was curator of Mathura Museum also, and he was embodiment of Indian scholarship. He has written one book in Hindi and also in English, Panini in Bharat in Hindi and India in Panini in English. It's a very, very great work of learning, cultural study. There one can realize so much of social elements are available. Likewise, we have works on Kalidasa, Bhagavad Sharan Upadhyaya. Though a leftist to an extent, his study of Kalidasa is very thorough, and the society of Kalidasa has been represented by him. India in Kalidasa has a Hindi version also. And the great scholar Vasudev Sharan Agrawal ji was a very great champion of Vyakaran and Veda also. He wrote 2 more books in Hindi, Kadambari Ek Sanskritik Adhyayan and then Harshacharit Ek Sanskritik Adhyayan. Very good books. There also you can see how was the society that has been depicted by Banabhatta in his great prose works, Kadambari and Harshacharita. Likewise, we have many cultural study works on other subjects also in English and in Hindi. Cultural study works have been done on Gatha Saptashati, on Chaturbhani, and then on Kuttini Mata of Damodar Gupta. And then cultural study on various Puranas have been done. Professor Hajra has done a wonderful cultural study on Vayu Purana, and many other cultural studies on various Puranas have been done. And it is being continued. Cultural study of Manso, Lhasa, like that. Many other cultural studies have been done. There is separate section in any cultural study work is devoted for understanding the society there, how the society is depicted. These are the secondary sources. From there we can know how much useful material can be made available there. So the society in all its rawness, in all its naturality, in all its reality can be seen in kavyas and natakas. Because smritis, generally, they become more prescriptive. The works on Dharmashastra, earliest works on Dharmashastras, exclusive works on Dharmashastras belong to Kalpa Sutras. The Griya Sutras are restricted to family, and Dharma Sutras extending up to the larger society. And then the combination of them is seen in Smriti works. For example, as Vedangas, in Kalpa Sutras, they have 4 categories I mentioned earlier. Shauta Sutra and Shulpa Sutra, they deal with ritual. And then Griya Sutra and Dharma Sutra, they deal with family and society. And these have been authored by many people. For example, we have Apastamba. He has to spread all 4 sutras, Griya, Kalpa, Shrauta and Shulpa. So also Bodhayana. But a few authors have to the credit only either Dharma Sutra or Griya Sutra. Shrauta Sutra and Griya Sutra like that. For example, Ashvalayana has written both the Griya Sutra and then Shrauta Sutra. But his Dharma Sutras are missing. Gautama has written Dharma Sutra, but Griya Sutra of Gautama is missing. And Khadira has written Griya Sutra. Paraskara and Katyayana have written Shauta Sutras, but their Dharma Sutras are missing. Like that, there are so many works which are available and some of them are missing. They are in the form of cryptic aphorisms, short, one-lined, half-a-lined maxioms, I can say. And they formulate, they are explained by the commentators, Haradatta or Govindaswamy. Like that, we have many commentators on every sutra. They are written in lucid Sanskrit. Many of them have Hindi translations also. Much of them have been published by the Chokamba publishers of Varanasi. And then Smritis. Then comes Smritis. Based on these, Smritis have been evolved. Of them, we have totally 40 or 44 in number, but 18 are more known. Ashtadasha Smriti. Of them, some 6-7 are very important. One is of Manu, of course, and then Yajnavalkya, then Parashara, then Naradi Vishnu Smriti, then Katyayana Smriti, like that Atri Smriti, like that they have been named. Among these, some of the Smritis have commentaries. Not all the Smritis have commentaries. Manu has 9 commentaries, while Parashara has only 1 commentary. Yajnavalkya has several commentaries. Of the commentaries on Manu, 2 commentaries are the most popular. Of them, one is Medhatiti of Medhatiti and other is of Kulluka Bhatta. And from on Yajnavalkya Smriti, 1 commentary written by Vijnaneshwara, that is Akshara, is very, very popular. And the other commentary written by Vishwarupa, known as Bala Krida, is very popular. And Jimuta Vahana, she has written a commentary, and that is also very, very popular. Like that, several commentaries on Yajnavalkya Smriti are available. On Naradi Vishnu Smriti, Nanda Pandita has written a very exhaustive and useful commentary. Like that, few Smritis have commentaries, and there some elements are certainly useful. But what happens with the Smritis, they deal more with the lifestyle of 2 categories of the society. One is Brahma and other is of Kshatra. Though they deal with other Varnas and also Pratiloma and Anuloma Varnas, many combinations of these Varnas. The 4 Varnas intermingling and producing children, and they belong to various occupations like that. Just they have been mentioned, they are enlisted. But the work activity, the daily routine of only Brahmana community has been dealt with in detail. Even the activity of Kshatriya community is not given in greater detail except the Rajadharma Prakarana, that is Vyavahara. It is more connected with the profession as a ruler and also the proceedings of governance, and less connected with lifestyle. And also the other 2 Varnas, Vaishya and Shudra, they have been not discussed in elaboration. Hence, these Smritis and even the other works on Dharma Shastra and also many works which came later as Nibandha Grantha, encyclopedic in nature. Some of them are even bigger than the Mahabharata of Bhagavan Vedavyasa. For example, Mitra Mishra's Kira Mitrodaya is a very voluminous work. Or another voluminous and encyclopedic work of Hemadri, Chaturvarga Chintamani, and then Dalpatram's Sanskar Sara, Todarananda, another work, and then Pratap Rudra's Saraswati Vilasa, and Devana Bhatta's Smriti Chandrika. Like that, we have so many works. They run to thousands of pages. So big there. But they deal again with these features in greater and greater detail. If it is one thing called Snana, they give all details regarding Snana running up to several pages. If it is food, partaking with food, lot of details will be given like that. They become more ritualistic in nature than socialistic. How the society is, how the people behave, such details are not given. Hence, in spite of their volume, what useful material for a sociologist? Not many. And another great difficulty, rather danger, is people who are very narrow in their approach, especially the Western scholar, thorough but narrow. And also, some of them have ulterior motives also. They try to interpret them wrongly because the tone of the Smritis lend for such interpretations. The tone of the Smritis are highly conservative in nature and prescriptive in nature. Shasanatmak, because of their tone, temperament, not the intent. Temperament and tone is highly conservative and prescriptive, and that's why they think that the society was so rigid, society was so narrow, society had so much of hegemony, society has so much of disparity like that. They immediately jump to conclusion and they draw so many inferences based on that. Unfortunately, our Indian scholars who are well-meaning, they're perplexed in front of them, perplexed in front of such arguments, because they have to understand the nature and intent of this Smritis. That can be known only by looking into parallel literature, other Shastras, other Kavya Natakas. Because if Manu says, or if another Smriti says that a person coming from a Shudra Varna cannot become king, though Manusmriti has not said, it may create an idea that Shudra cannot rule. It means the reality is not so. In the history of India, we don't find that. Why? Even the Puranas have agreed with this. In the Vishnu Purana, one of the most famous and illustrious Puranas among the 18 Mahapuranas, it is said Nandantam Kshatriya Kulam. After the Nanda dynasty, no more Kshatriyas really ruled India. It means what? It is not Janma Kshatriya, it is Guna Kshatriya. As examples I shall give, one of the most illustrious royal families is of the Chalukyas. From Karnataka, they arose. They were basically belonging to the Shudra caste. And their name Chalukya has been attributed to one Kannada word, Chaluki, Saniki, like that means working in the fields, actually working labor class. They rose up to the level of great emperors. And the Chalukyan Empire extended up to Gujarat, extended up to Bengal, and extended up to Kashmir and Nepal also. We see so many, and even to Michila, and even to Andhra Pradesh, and to so many other places. The Solanki, the surname of North India, comes from Chalukya. It is the Apabhrumish of the word Chalukya, Solanki. So also Rathod has come from Rashtrakuta, another dynasty of kings from Karnataka. They were again belong to the class which is not connected to Kshatriyas. There are so many such examples. Hundreds and hundreds of royal families were not from the so-called Kshatriya Varna. They are all Guna Kshatriyas. It means Smritis, they never speak of this. Our Kavyas and Ityasas, they say Veera Bhojya Vasundhara. Who is capable, who is qualified physically, mentally, he or she will rule. That is how it is being said. But in Smritis, it is not said so. And also, several kingdoms which were originated by Vaishyas. For example, the most famous is Gupta and Maukharis. Harshavardhana Shiladitya belong to Vaishya community, and then Guptas belong to Vaishya community, and there are many such examples. And even from the Adivasis, we have great kings. The Chandelas, the Paramaras, all people came from the Adivasi community. And even the Kalinga Gangas, all came from the Adivasi community, means tribal community. And many of these kings, even the Pandyan kings, were basically from the agriculturists and from the merchants. It means all these people, they performed many sacrifices, many yagas, Rajasuya, Ashwamedha, Paundarika, Vajpayee, and many such yagas. You all know from the Vedic literature that these yagas can only be performed by people who have access to Vedas. It means all these kings, they have performed. What it indicates, our society was not very much confined to birth. In reality, it was not. But how come these Smritis are saying? And that's why they were not very, very strict and stringent. And their temperament was prescriptive. But in reality, they were not. Our Shastras usually, they go by that tone. We all know our elderly people, even today, they speak as though they are prescribing. And that's why our younger people, for millennials, they feel bad. Oh, they're all prescriptive and they impose. But with all concern they are saying, and in essence they are not prescriptive, they are caring, they are concerned. More than the prescription, more than the formality, more than the domination, it is the concern, it is the kindness that is seen in our elders, and that has to be identified in many of our Shastras. That is the tone in all Shastras. Even a practical Shastra like music, which is very, very abstract in nature. Music, of course, is very abstract art. And there, if you go to any Sangeet Shastra Grantha, you can very, very clearly see how strict and stringent are the rules. You see, in the Sangeet Shastras, it is said, a musician should not nod his head. A musician, a singer should not move his hands. He should be firm, still, and sing. But even the Vedic recitation also they are prescribed so. Giti, Shikri, Shirakkampi, Shirakkampa. One should not nod heads. But not even a single musician can be seen who will not indulge in nodding heads or moving hands. Without that, they can't even sing. Can we stop Bhimsen Joshi or Jasraj or Balamurali Krishna or other great musicians not to move their body, not to move their limbs and sit as still as a stone image and sing? No, they can't. Means what? They are going against Sangeet Shastra? No. It says about some ideal, but it accepts them also. If not, all this parampara, how come it should have been realized? Guru Shishya Parampara, the ragas are maintained intact, the talas are maintained intact, the swaras and shrutis. When all these things have been passed on to one generation after another generation with such an austerity, how come this has been ignored? Means our Shastras are really accommodating. Why? You take Alankar Shastra, means the Shastra meant for writing good poetry. There invariably have a chapter on Kavya Doshas, blemishes of poetry. If you turn to Mahima Bhatta, or if you turn to the pages of Mamata's Kavya Prakasha, or if you turn to Vishwanatha's Sahitya Darpana, or Bhojaraja's Saraswati Kantaprana, I have hundreds of verses which illustrate blemishes, and not to do that. But such blemishes are found replete, plenty in even great poets like Kalidasa, Bhaubhuti, Banabhatta, and others. Means what? Are they not accepting these poets? They have been praised like anything. Means theory says something, but practice will be something else. But that is not hypocrisy. that is not dichotomy, there will always be some amount of gap between the so-called ideal within quotes and then the reality. But we have to identify where the reality, where the ideality, and we have to strike the balance. And that's why to know the reality of our society, to know the nature of life of ancient India, we have to come to these actual demonstrations. That's why more than the Lakshana Granthas, more than the prescriptive works, the descriptive works, that is the Lakshya Granthas, are very important. Unless this is realized, one cannot make meaningful assessment and draw meaningful conclusions which are useful for the present study. Well, in the Atharva Veda, we have one example. A married woman trying to make some sort of arrangement so that her husband will always be with her, will not be marrying any other person, will not be going to any other woman. For that we have mantras. At the same time, we have mantra for a person, for a man who wants to woo another girl. It means what? Purusha Vashikarana and Stri Vashikarana mantras, both the mantras are present in Atharva Veda. It means what? Even in that society, we had such concerns, such anguished people who wanted to see that by some way or the other, they should get their beloved with them. This is a universal entity. And Atharva Veda has given mantras to this. Means what? It has noticed that and it has taken care of their desires. It means what? Should the society go astray? No, it is not. At the same time, it is telling about Sammanasya Sukta. Anuvrata Pitu Putro Matra Bhavatu Sammana, like that. The son should be obedient to father, daughter should be obedient to wife, husband and wife should be together, and then the family should work well, like that. These aspirations are also there. It means it is catering to so many desires, so many requirements of the society to an extent that the harmony is maintained within variety. And also, we have many such hymns in Atharva Veda. One separate section itself is meant for that. But at the same time, it is also said that society should be within a frame. Deviation should be within permissible limit. That is also there. So, in a vehicle, we have accelerator and also brake. A vehicle without accelerator cannot move. A vehicle without brake cannot stop. Only vehicle with accelerator or brake is useless. We should have both. So, the expansive and the controlling, both the systems are needed, and that is how our Shastras and Kavya get along. And that's why, before conducting an interdisciplinary study, such a broad-based philosophical agreement and understanding must be there. One Upanishad, that is Chandogya Upanishad, several sages, they come to a great king of Kekaya. Now that province is located in Pakistan. Unfortunately, it has gone to that side. And Kekaya, Ashwapati's daughter, is Savitri, the great Sati Savitri. Then these sages, they had a philosophical doubt, and they go to Kekaya king Ashwapati, thinking that they have come with a complaint. Ashwapati says, "O sages, you have come to me. I'm perplexed whether anything has gone wrong in my rule. But as far as my knowledge goes, I don't see any alcoholic in my country, any debauchery going on in my country. and any robbery going on in my country. I don't see any such unlawful acts in my society. I don't know why all you people have come to me. Then they say, no, no, your kingdom is very good, very nice, and it's flourishing very well. We have a philosophical inquiry, and we thought a king like you can only solve that, and not mere pages like this. So the discussion goes on. The emphasis is more on Ashwapati dealing with that Upanishadic Vidya, which was under discussion. But the preamble of the story is very important to a sociologist. Means, even those days, these problems of society were there. These were the social pains, and a true ruler used to control them, used to eradicate them properly. And if any pious people used to come in groups, king used to be alarmed. What's happening? Anything wrong? Like that, he with all concern used to go with that issue. And when he comes to know that nothing wrong has happened, he used to feel a great sigh of relief. Means, this is how from our sources at a fringe level we'll be having our concerned topics, and we have to go with that. In Rigveda, there is one passing reference to a sailor by name Bhujyu. He is devoted to Ashwinis. His devotion is to certain gods. But his father, Tugra, was not devoted to Ashwins and was also always having complaint with his son. Your belief is not correct. Then Bhujyu, with the help of Ashwins, gets saved in a tempest, in a storm in sea. And then his father too realizes that the belief system of his son is good. It means father and son, they had some conflict. That always happens. There are many such examples in our Vedas and Puranas also. For example, father becoming very rude and very short-tempered, and by virtue of which son is going to suffer, and how a mature son would correct the father in a very, very polite manner. That is seen in the story of Nachiketa and Vajashravas. Vajashravas' father and son Nachiketa. Vajashravas gave away barren cows as dana, charity, to which son had a complaint. And they had rift. And the story goes like that. I need not elaborate the story of Upanishad. But there, a person younger in years, a son making his father get his attitude corrected. That is one thing. And in the same Upanishadic world, in Chandogya Upanishad, a fresh graduate, Shvetaketu, comes from his college. He is Tabdhaha, Mahamanaha, Anuchanamani. So the Upanishad says, he was stiff-necked, Stabdhaha, highbrow, Mahamanaha, thinking that he is very big shot. He is very well learned. And Anuchanamani, he blindly following the bookish knowledge. Anuchana means traditional. Just blindly becoming traditional is Anuchanamani. The word mani in Sanskrit means, though he is not, he is thinking that he is. Having wrong priorities and taking that as a great thing. Anuchanamani, Vidvanmani, Pragyamani, like that. Pragyamani means he is not Pragya. He is only Pragyamani, thinks that he is very Pragya. Like that. Son had become that. And then father, Uddalaka Aruni asks him, do you know the subject by virtue of which you can know everything? Isminu khalu vijnate sarvamidam vijnatam bhavati. Son dismisses, no, nothing of that subject is there. Nothing is there by that. No. Your teachers knew that. Perhaps you would not have studied. No, my teacher is also not aware of that. If not, he would have taught me. No, my son, only modest people can learn that. If you had approached with all modesty of all your teacher, he would have told. Then he comes down, and later father teaches the son. The story goes like that. And that is the greatest Vidya, Sadvidya Prakarana. Well, so in Kathopanishad, son teaching a lesson to father. In Chandogya Upanishad, father teaching a lesson to son. And also in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, husband teaching a great secret of life, Vedanta, to his beloved wife, Maitreyi. Yajnavalkya teaching that to Maitreyi, rather sharing it. Likewise, misplaced priorities when husband has, wife teaches him and brings back to correct path. And that happens in Yoga Vasishtha, where Chudala, a great yogini, will be teaching what is right and what is wrong in yoga, and sets her husband Shikhidvaja to proper place. And also, a mother teaching son highest truth is seen in the story of Madalasa. Madalasa teaching the highest truth to his son, to her son Alarka in Markandeya Purana. Means so many such examples are available. Well, a son will be teaching the highest truth to his mother. That is seen in Bhagavata. Kapila teaching the highest wisdom to his mother Devahuti. I am saying it is not a linear thing that father or mother or teacher, the elder will always be teaching the younger. The other way is also true. That's why it is said good things have to be learned from anyone. That's why I said we have to learn even from parents. We have to learn even from children. From apigrahyam subhashitam baladapi shukadapi. Apyagrahyam subhashitam baladapi shukadapi, like it is said. So such stories, such elements from our Shastric lore are very many, and we have to know that. For example, in Rigveda, we have a feature touching upon the frontiers of incest, Yama Yami Sukta, in the 10th mandala. And there, Yami, the younger sister, tries to propose her elder brother Yama. We are in a secluded place. Why not we have physical relationship? Because we are a man and a woman. Is it not sufficient? Then Yama says, no, this is not the way. This is not the correct path, like that. It means the society would have witnessed incest, and for the well-being of the society, that would have been corrected. Such examples are very many. And also, husband working for the happiness of wife and trying to earn Agastya, though he was a very pious and reluctant person towards worldly pleasures and worldly profits, he had to oblige his wife, Lopamudra, who was from a royal family, and how to keep her in comfort. For that, in Puranas, we have stories that he will be going to various places and gets money so that his wife will be placed well and he will be having pleasure with her. That reference is there in Lopamudra Agastya Samvada. And also Urvashi Pururav Samvada, where it is something like a living relationship, living together. Urvashi and Pururava had a good stay. And on one fine or one bad morning, Urvashi ditches Pururava and goes away. Then on some other occasion, he meets her, pleads for re-establishing the relationship, but Urvashi says a firm no. And then he feels bad. Somehow he is later consoled and convinced, like that the story ends. Means such things were there in the society, and naturally that meant our Shastrakaras to frame certain rules of marriage that we see in our Dharma Shastras. In Dharma Shastras, we have 8 systems of marriage, 8 ways of marriage. Brahma, Arsha, Prajapatya, Daiva, Gandharva, Rakshasa, Asura, and Paishacha. All the 8 systems of marriage are legally valid. The best, they say, is Brahma. The worst, they say, Paishacha. Even then, even the worst is also a marriage. And here in these 8 categories, you can see all sorts of marriage which are even today in practice. In urban societies, in the rural societies, and even in the Aboriginal societies. We do see. Brahma is 100% arranged marriage with the consent of all the elders. While Prajapatya is, as part of a ritual, if the marriage happens, then it is Prajapatya. Daiva means by accident, by somehow everything forges. It is not a planned one, and yet it becomes a planned. And such a pleasant surprise is Daiva. Arsha means where the Vadhu Dakshina is being given. Though we have dowry, unfortunately we don't have now. Before 20 or 30 years, it was in rampant. I don't know, in North India or in some parts of Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, even today we find that, especially in the rural folk, we do have dowry, which is demanded by the bride's family, bridegroom's family. But in those days, it was from the bride that the dowry was demanded. By getting 2 cows from the groom, the girl used to get married to him. And that is Arsha. Even today, such marriages are seen in many Adivasi communities, because daughter is a wealth. When I am giving away my daughter, I should get some compensation. That's how it used to go on. And even today in our Adivasi community, we have certain things like the groom has to come and work for a few years there in the in-laws place, something like that. So this is Arsha. And Gandharva is typical of marriage. Many of you would have known. Starting from Shakuntala Drishyante, there are many such instances. Gandharva. Gandharva deals with passion. And passionately, the couple get married. And then no witness will be there apart from the Panchabhutas and so that is Gandharva. And then we have Rakshasa. Rakshasa means eloping. We have 2 distinct features. Asura is a kidnap, while Rakshasa is an elope. If the girl and boy, they are willing, and if she is eloped, then it is Rakshasa. Rakshasa should not be taken as demonic. Rakshasiti Rakshasa. With a valor, he comes to protect her. That happened in the case of Rukmini. Krishna, he was not abducting Rukmini, he was saving her from the undesired marriage which would go on with Shishupala. And that's why the word Rakshasa, depending upon the context, has to be properly interpreted. The etymological meaning of Rakshasa is Rakshanti iti Rakshasa. When the demons were created, why they were named so? They said to the creator, we will protect you, don't worry. In arrogance they told, but yet with concern. And the Yakshas, they were created, Yakshantiti, Yakshamaha. Yakshama means we worship. And so Yakshas were very devoted. In our sculptures and others, Yakshas are represented as dwarf people. Dwarfness in our Shilpa Shastra indicates subordination, submission. It will not indicate separate race like pygmies of Africa. Means our sculpture, our painting, all our arts, they are misrepresented. Their suggestion and symbolism is not at all taken into consideration, which can only be known by a well-informed traditional native practitioner of those shastras. Well, coming back to the marriage, we have something like the other one, Asura, that is kidnapping. And then the last one, Paishacha, it is ravishing a woman, Atyachar. Even then, she has to be given certain justice. She should not be left. That's why they were compelled to marry. That man who had ravished her should marry her. Like that, a rule used to be made. That was the day there. So all the people should get justice to an extent. That was the intent in such marriages. And so once getting married means all the rights, property rights, everything will come. Stridhana, the money which was given to the wife from her parents, should never be touched by the husband. In our Dharma Shastras, there are a big section called Stridhana. At any instance, the money which has been given to her, whether in the wealth which has been given in terms of cash or kind immobile property like lands or houses, or movable property like jewelry and others, nothing can be taken away by the husband, not even by the in-laws. It is completely for her. And how it has to be shared later after her life, that is a different chapter, and there we have a lot of discussion in Dharma Shastra. Why I am saying the property right of women were clearly seen, rights of women were clearly seen in Stridhana. Like that it goes. And also the children which are born out of all these 8 types of marriages had equal rights. Not only that, even children who are born outside the frame of marriage were also given equal rights. We have 10 to 13 types of children. There we have many types of children, Aurasa, born to both the parents in a formal family manner, or as Kanina, the son who was, or daughter who was born before marriage, when the mother was still Kanya, unmarried, when she begets a child, that child is called Kanina. And when she was pregnant and gets married to another person who is not that, who was the reason for this pregnancy, and that son who was born after marriage, she was pregnant, was born after marriage, the son or daughter, was called Sahoda. Means that marriage happened with pregnancy itself. Means the child was adopted by the married husband, though it was not biological, he was not the biological father, he would become the father, and that is Sahoda. And then Buddha. We don't know how, to whom the son was born or daughter was born. Satyakama Jabala. That is Buddha. And then wife is married to a person, girl is married to a person, he is unable to beget a child. Then she gets children from some other person, like what happened in the case of Kunti. Such children, when the legal father is still alive, not the biological father. Biological fathers may be different, but legal father, when he is still alive, then such children were called Kundakas. Pandavas are all Kundakas. When the father is no more, legal father is died, and the wife wants to have children after she becomes a widow, after attaining widowhood, she wants to have children, and such a child is called Golaka. Like that, we have Dattaka, adoption, Krita, purchased, or Karunya. Just by compassion, we accept someone as children. Dattaka means formal system of adoption has to go on. There is a formality. Even without that, we just say that by compassion, out of compassion, I have adopted this person. It is over. Property rights are there. Like that, there are so many such features are seen in our Dharma Shastra. And for that, we get parallels in our Purana, in our Itihasas, in our Kavya. Like that, these are certain features with which we can know how the society was handling this, how it was handling. They have to maintain sanctity of married life, structure and robustness of family, because family at any time is the basic unit. But at the same time, we have to cater to the lapses here and there going on. We have to cater to the indefinable nature of human mind. Human mind is so peculiar. all the good and bad, all the angularities of the human mind should also be considered, because one should be understanding the very nature, prakriti. After that comes Sanskriti. Like that, these are certain features with which our kavyas, our shastra, especially our dharma shastra, have toiled. That can be known with a bigger mindset of compassion. In Kama Sutra, we have clear reference to the gender minority people also. That we see in Dharma Shastra also, more than anything in Kama Sutras we see. Kama Sutra, though it has not prohibited the nature of gender minority people, we know from modern sciences that it is the natural thing. It is nowhere natural. But those people, they had a vague understanding of this. And hence, though Dharma Shastra prescribes certain prayashchitta for same-sex marriage, same-sex and such other deviations, at the same time, their prayashchittas are very, very meager. When compared to the prayashchittas of other patakas, these are not at all prayashchittas. It means it has to an extent foreseen such problems, such issues, and to whatever extent possible within those, it had made certain justice. At the same time, it was very cautious about the so-called regularity of the society. Such features can be seen with a very, very compassionate and very, very broad-based approach. So with this, I think our time is left for discussion. In the next meeting, I shall come to Kavyas. Thank you. Namaskar.
Dhanyavad. Ganeshji, it is wonderfully clear and crystal clear for our minds to learn about the contribution of these great kavyas and sastras ideas in Indian life and society. I am, with your kind permission, invite people for putting up their queries and questions, if they have any. Anybody is welcome to unmute himself or herself and come here for putting up question directly. That would be much better.
So I would like to ask the question. Yes. So Ganeshji, I am absolutely. I should say that I have never heard this kind of a interpretation of the shastras that you have done today. What I could gather, and I want to be corrected if I have, received it wrongly. You mean to say that there were parallel texts, and the Dharma Shastras were more concerned about maintaining the sanctity of social norms and whatever. At the same time, we had parallel texts which were very conducive and very accommodative of human passions and nature and whatever. So my concern is that, one, we have never come across this kind of a inclusiveness being discussed. This is our ignorance. Secondly, how is it that we have never come across a kind of a, that both of them coming to crossroads and ever being like, for example, a dialectic kind of a thing between the two kinds of texts that you're talking, whether it is the 4 texts that you talked about in the beginning and afterwards also the Kama Sutra and everything. And if they are parallel texts, this is an eye-opener that we have a very inclusive kind of literature which provides for everything, but this kind of parallel contradictory terms, I somehow fail to understand that why it has not ever been brought to notice, ever.
Wonderful, Shailaji. What I wanted to suggest, put forth, submit with all humility is, Dharma Shastras, they are like the brake and clutch of a vehicle. While other Shastras, for example, Natya Shastra, Kama Shastra, Kavyas, Patakas, they were like the accelerators. Both are needed. We fail to appreciate them unless we have an analogy like this. Both are needed. We need rainy season, water in plenty, and at the same time, rainy season should stop. If not, we cannot have cultivation. Agriculture can go on only with water. At the same time, 365 days means water will be needed. Water will be death to all our activity. Water is called Jivanam in Sanskrit, life. Jivanam, Bhuvanam, Vanam. At the same time, excess is wrong. So both operate, and that's why we have many people who are experts in all these. For example, Rajshekhar, a great poet and a Sarvashastrajna, knew so many Shastras, and he was advisor and mentor to kings of Kanuj. After the fall of Harshavardhana and Mokharis, these are the Chauhans. They were ruling as center of at the center Kanuj, Kanyakubja, on the banks of Ganga. They were ruling. Rajshekhara was their advisor, and Rajshekhara was a born Brahmin, and he married a Kshatriya lady called Avanti Sundari. And in his works, here and there, he gives opinions of various scholars and also gives the opinion of his wife. Ityevam Avanti Sundari, Om iti Ayavariyaha. And me, Rajshekhara, accept my wife's opinion as it is more valid than any other. Can we see anywhere husband openly endorsing the opinions of wife? That happened before 1,100 years. It means he can know. And he gives so many analogies from so many different shastras. Like this, there are many. Even up to the era of Nagesh Bhatta, who was in the late 17th century, after the fall of Aurangzeb and others, he was in Varanasi. He has written profusely on almost 4 or 5 shastras. He gives very so-called revolutionary ideas. They are not revolutionary, they are reality. They can synthesize these things. And Vidyaranya Swamiji of Vijayanagar, he writes, our Dharmashastrakara, I told earlier itself in my deliberations earlier, every commentator used to give a new interpretation. In the West, what happens? Every professor wants to come out with a new theory of his own. But that is a very violent revolution. Ours is a silent revolution. What happens in ours? We write commentary to the same work, but with a different approach. Means we want to establish links, organic links with the tradition. At the same time, we want to show how different we are. Means difference in oneness. That way of connecting to the same old text and giving a different interpretation. And that's why we have so many Ramayanas. People wrote 300 Ramayanas, A.K. Ramanujan wrote. Many people think that all the Ramayanas are opposed to each other. And the leftists, they want to scream. They scream that all the Ramayanas are different and they don't obey Valmiki. No. It is our perspective. A 20th century Telugu poet, very high eminence from Andhra Pradesh, Vishwanath Satyanarayana, he got a Jnanapita award for his work Ramayana Kalpvruksham, and his another epic novel, Veyi Padagalu, has been translated by P.V. Narasimha Rao to Hindi as Sahasraphan, and that became a TV serial also. And there in his Ramayana Kalpvruksham, Vishwanath Satyanarayana says, everyone have the hunger for Ramayana. Me too have my hunger, and I have to eat, and I have to quench my hunger by having my own food of my choice, and that's why I write my Ramayana. Like that, we have 300 or 3 lakh Ramayana based on it, but all follow Rama, all follow Sita, all follow Hanuman, and all have devotion in Valmiki. In that way, this is a silent revolution. That's so we have parallel texts, but not diverging texts. Parallel means, light rays, when they travel in parallelity without diverging, they become laser. Laser is a very effective thing. Laser can cut metals also. This way of parallel texts, they're so incisive They can cut across any obstacle. And that's why our society is intact even today. In spite of so many invasions, in spite of so many people from our own land, our own Sanatan Dharmic people undoing our society, in spite of that, it is remaining because of that.
Thank you so much. Is there any other question by anyone? Please unmute and come forward, please.
Ganeshi, I am Sudhir Babu from Kerala. I would like to ask one question. Sir, in our darshanas, there are Astika and Nastika darshanas.
Yes.
When you accept one, a particular darshana for your interpretation of a sociological issue, can we borrow ideas from the just opposite Astika or Nastika darshanas? How can it possible?
I'm unable to
Will it be contradictory?
Contradictory of what?
See, we have Astika and Nastika darshanas.
Yes.
When we accept a particular point of view, suppose Astika darshana,
Yes.
for interpreting a social issue, a sociological problem, can we borrow ideas from the Nastika darshana also?
Certainly. Very good question. Shall I answer?
How can it be possible? Because it is contradictory in many sense.
But starting from a staunch Mimamsaka like Kumarila Bhatta to Vedantins like Shankara, we do see such an acceptance. Kumarila Bhatta in his Shloka Vartika elaborately discusses how we have to learn many things from Buddhism. And also Shankara says, Anuktam Anyato Grahyam Apratishidham Anuvatam Bhava. It is a very famous dictum. From other systems of philosophy which are similar to us called Samana Tantra and which are dissimilar to us Asamana Tantra, we can get proper inputs. And that's why different features, it all depends upon the context, how we can take. One classic example is Indian aesthetics. Indian aesthetics has taken from all systems of Indian knowledge, from Vyakarana, from Mimamsa, from Buddhism, from Jainism, from Vedanta, from Pratyabhijna Shaiva Darshana, from Sankhya, Nyaya, and so many systems of philosophy we have taken. And also one point I should say, this categorization of Astika and Nastika Darshana itself is a very superfluous thing. Because, like the Westerners said, believers and non-believers, we can't say Astika and Nastika. Because in Manusmriti it is said, who is Nastika? Nastiko Veda Nindaka. Who is not accepting Vedas is Nastika. And there nothing about the mention of a god or not has been taken. In that sense, Mimamsakas have not at all accepted God, but they have accepted Vedas. Though Nayayikas, they accept the Veda, God, they have no great respect for Veda. Like any other text is also a text. And the same case with Sankhya. But all these are categorized as Astika Darshana. So, this superfluous categories should not be taken as absolute. And we have to look into the text and the growth of the subject properly. Popular slogans taken from secondary sources many times will be very dangerous. Next question, please.
Any other question? I can see some young scholars here. Please unmute yourself and ask question, please.
Hello.
Kindly introduce yourself, sir. Professor.
Hello, I'm Mr. Monga from Himachal Pradesh. My submission is that this was a very informative lecture which has come. I enjoyed it. So when I look at the Hindu marriages, the 8 types of marriages which has been explained, And when I come to the Indian Constitution, in which the sanctity lies with the monogamous marriages, and moving beyond that into the contemporary society, we find the emergence of the lesbian marriages, the gay marriages, the living relationships. So we have three sets of marriages when we compare. So where do we place our Vedas when we compare it with the Indian Constitution, which gives emphasis on monogamous marriages, and the contemporary society, which has given recognition to the lesbian, the gay, and the living relationships? So I want clarification on that.
As far as my knowledge goes with the Vedas and the Vedic marriage is far more open and broad-minded, broad-based than our constitution's agreements. Our constitution's marriage laws, they are more Christian in nature, less Vedic. Hence, with Vedic perspective, if we see the spirit of the Vedas are properly taken into heart and we see, it is far more broad-based, far more open-minded, and far more generous. It is catering to multicultural features without violation of the oneness of Chaitanya, oneness of Atma. Vedic approach to marriage is really, really great.
Gee, thank you so much.
Thank
We
you,
are
sir.
out
Thank
of
you.
time. Thank you so much. I can put my little question from you, sir,
Please.
that I heard in your lecture today, you were mentioning about Chalukyas crossing Mithila. Do we have any epigraphic evidence that they have ruled over Mithila and Nepal?
Yes.
We do have that.
Yes.
Okay. This is very short question it was.
Yes.
Now, you want to add something or I go for the...
No, we have plenty of references to them in our history.
Okay.
Earlier, our kings were not restricted to those regions, and no time in India we had a province belonging to a language. The linguistic division of states, it has created lot of mishappenings. And that's why regional chauvinism has come into place because of linguistic division of states. Earlier, it was not so. You see, what happened, you can take the classic example of Tamil Nadu. This regional chauvinism based on language mainly started from Tamil Nadu. Because Tamil Nadu is the first province where Nastikya means anti-Sanatana Dharma. That development started with that Justice Party, Dravida Kalagam, Dravida Munnetra Kalagam, like that we have many, and I did not go through the history of that, the growth of that. They were iconoclasts. They were against our gods, against Sanatana Dharma, our deities, against temples. But they were not against Islam or Christianity. It is a very shrewd and cutthroat approach. But they were against Sanatana Dharma. And people who followed these DK, DMK and all, they were Hindus. But in place of the gods, they wanted to worship something else, they worshipped language. We need something to worship. You see, ultimately what is communism? It is Christianity without Christ. But it is certainly a Bible, certainly a prophet. Marx is the prophet and Das Kapital is the Bible. So the same old wine in new bottle, that's all. All hiccups and all shortcomings are there. Everything is there. The Semitic religions, monolithic and narrow-minded approach is very well seen and nurtured and multiplied, and it is worse in communism. So, Tamil Nadu, it worshipped language, but it didn't worship language as it has. They have produced great works as literature. But before that, in Tamil, we have great literature, Sangam literature, or the Panchamaha there, or even the Alvars, Nayanmars, and all, so great literature. But from DK and DMK, no great literature was produced. Fanatism was produced and not fraternity. So, linguistic division of states, brainchild of Nehru, that made this erosion. But in ancient India, it was not so, and that's why so many languages used to live under the same king, and a Kannada kingdom like Chalukya can very easily go to North India and establish and respect those languages. This could happen.
Yeah, thank you. I would now invite Professor Chandrakala Padia ji for her presidential words. Kindly come and unmute yourself, Professor Chandrakala ji, please.
Thank you, Amarjiva ji. Thank you very much. Our most revered, am I audible? Namaskar.
Very much.
Yes, you're audible. You're audible. Please go on.
You are audible, ma'am.
Professor P.V. Krishna Bhatta ji, Tejasvi, Gyan Marmagya, Vedanti, Bhasha Vigyani, Kavi and Darshanik, and above all, an enlightened soul, Dr. Shatabdhani R. Ganesh ji, the great scholar and president of Rashtriya Samaj Vigyan Parishad, Professor A.D.N. Bajpayee ji, a most committed and dedicated scholar, Professor Sheila Rai ji, who is presently the secretary of Rashtriya Samaj Vigyan Parishad, Professor Sushma Yadav ji, a scholar of great repute and a par excellent administrator, distinguished scholars like Professor Rajkumar Bhatia ji, Professor Amarjiva Lochan ji, Professor Prakash Mani Tripathi ji, VC Amarkantak University, and all other distinguished members of Rashtriya Samaj Vigyan Parishad, as well as participants. At the outset, I express my gratitude to Dr. Shatabdhani R. Ganesh ji for honoring the invitation of Rashtriya Samaj Vigyan Parishad to deliver a series of lectures on such an important subject and uncover the riches of India's intellectual tradition in the field of social sciences. I cannot refrain myself from saying that I have had the privilege of listening to one of the most illuminating lectures in my life. I fully agree what Sheila just said. I am mesmerized. And so many things have been uncovered. And now I think that I should now join as a student of Dr. Shatabdhani ji. Then only probably so many things will be clear to me. Dr. Shatabdhani ji's interpretation of so many things in his earlier lectures, like the abduction of Sita by Ravana, Sita's Agni Pariksha, meaning of Purusha, education and Vigyan in the Indian tradition, and how Vidya cohorts three things, Adhikari, Vishay and Prayojan, and how attainment of moksha as the overriding aim of Indian philosophy, literature, music, dance exhibit the inclusive character of Indian tradition as opposed to exclusionary nature of Christian tradition. And today what he has been speaking, on so many kinds of marriages and so many kinds of putras and sons, it all the more emphasized the inclusive nature of India's intellectual tradition. According to one example which has been given by you in one of your lectures, I would say that you have lit the lamp. It is for us to recognize or realize our path. You have truly said, by merely coloring, one cannot build a strong wall. What we have been doing all through. To begin with, I would like to say that I fully agree with what Dr. Shatabdhani ji has said, that the sources of social sciences lie in our Vedantic philosophy. All our concepts in social sciences, I would just like to submit before him that I have been trying to find the sources of liberty, equality, fraternity, women's position, status, nationalism, all these concepts in the Vedic philosophy. And I have come to the conclusion that all our concepts in social sciences, be it liberty, equality, justice, rights, nationalism, state, they are derived from Vedas and Upanishads. But the tragedy is that by and large, we have ignored our long traditions of sociological thinking that has always been careful of the internal diversity of Indian social reality and so sensitive to the intrinsic non-absoluteness of sociological constructs. How ironical it is that we know the West the way the West looks at itself, but we study the East the way West studies the East. We look at the world the way the West looks at it. Unfortunately, when Indian anthropologists, psychologists, or sociologists do their anthropology, psychology, or sociology, it seems that the West is really talking to itself. You know, Trinity Minnaha, the famous Vietnamese thinker, when she was writing, when she has finished one of her books, she wrote, when I started looking at it from the Vietnamese culture, I felt, oh God, what I have done. I have completely misunderstood my culture. So the same is the situation here also. Western thought holds the field today also in almost every region of intellectual activity, and many of our scholars today find it convenient to fit the Indian social reality to borrowed frameworks of thought, with scant regard for our own history of social theory and practice. That is why today, social sciences in India urgently require new formulations of problems and novel solutions to them. There is need to draw upon the resources of our own culture and intellectual traditions. There is need to redefine the nature of public debates and come up with questions and answers that suit the problems we face today. Rashtriya Samaj Vigyan Parishad is one step in that direction. And we bow to our revered Krishna Bhatta ji for thinking about this Rashtriya Samaj Vigyan Parishad and to all those members who are contributing to this. To my mind, as far as I have understood, the Vedantic philosophy advocates an integrated working of the body, mind, and spirit, without which attainment of the ultimate end of life, that is self-realization, is not possible. It is quite different from the predominantly material civilization like that of the West today. By and large, our emphasis has been on the need to rise up to a fuller vision of the eternal by following the dictates of conscience, morality, and dharma, and higher psychological practices. I am reminded of Manusmriti. People, you know, they just critique Manusmriti like anything, but the definition of dharma which has been given by Manusmriti, I found that definition as one of the best definitions given in any literary or sociological text. Manu says, we all know, Dhriti Chama Damo Asteyam Shaucham Indriya Nigraha Dhir Vidya Satyam Krodho Dashka Dharma Lakshanam. Now just see, he says Dhriti, Chama, all these Dhriti, Chama, Dam, Asteya, Shauch, Indriya Nigraha, Dhri, Vidya, Satyam और Akrodh, ये धर्म के 10 लक्षण है. God is not there. Just see this 10 virtues of life, he says, these are the ये धर्म के 10 लक्षण है. So just imagine what a scientific definition of dharma he has done. You will find that by and large, our emphasis has been on the need to rise up to a fuller vision of the eternal by following the dictates of conscience, morality, and dharma, and higher psychological practices. Our whole social system, philosophy, religion, yoga, art, and literature all are in principle directed to this end. This is to be seen not only in our most ancient scriptures and books of knowledge and texts like the Vedas and the Upanishads, but in the Smritis, which are products of a much later period. To quote Manusmriti, this quote I find very important in Manusmriti, where he says in the 12th chapter, verse 118, let man discriminate between good and evil, right and wrong, true and false, the real and unreal, and thus discriminating, let him yet one-pointedly even behold everything in the self, the transitory as well as that which abides. He who beholdeth all in the self, his mind strayeth not into self. I'm not quoting in English Sarvamatmani because I thought it will be better, for the students if I read it in Hindi or in English. The underlying idea that resonates most clearly in our basic philosophical tradition is that a person is not only an individual among other individuals, but is in principle knit indissolubly within a family, a community, and ultimately with the whole human race. This is the reason why we have never looked on society as a mere aggregate of individuals, but rather as a living organism where everyone is a complement of the other and should therefore help in creating, sustaining, and reinforcing an evolved social order. Any theorizing, to my mind, in social sciences must recognize the interplay of three factors: the cultural embeddedness of human beings, the inescapability and desirability of cultural diversity, and intercultural dialogue and the internal plurality of each culture. I think our Ganeshan ji has very well explained this today. We have to do away with the monological and logocentric, and also to question the narcissistic or hegemonic self-image that privileges Europe or the West as the cultural, scientific, religious, and moral mecca and capital of the world. We have to be aware of the twin dangers of ethnocentric chauvinism and faceless universalism. What we call universal is also actually not universal. Now let me highlight the role of Vedas in defining our basic concepts. It is due to Vedas that the Indian thought is rooted in a non-dualist metaphysics and epistemology which transcends the dichotomies between spirit and matter, the individual and society, nature and culture, necessity and freedom, elite and mass, subject and object, ends and means. Since Vedic philosophy believes in only one consciousness, that is why we believe in fraternal contextuality in place of the Western notion of species equality. That is, the embeddedness of humans in a rich and luxurious fabric of life, reaching from the animal kingdom all the way to gods and Brahmin. The Vedas speak of a cosmic federation of gods and men embraced by the divine. That is why in the Indian social science, there should be no place for atomistic individualism, mindless competition, and amoral power politics. To my mind, the Indian political theory rejects methodological individualism, which conceives individual as pleasure-seeking, utilitarian, and self-defining. It is formally entrenched in the traditional Hindu worldview, which conceives man essentially as a value-seeking being or homo philosophicus, and not merely as a techne-producing mechanomorphic being. Man in Indian tradition is always conceived as a cosmocentric and trans-social being. That is what has been several times emphasized by Swami Vivekananda, as much as I have understood, Sri Aurobindo, Dr. Deen Dayal Upadhyay, and Mahatma Gandhi. Even Norman D. Palmer, a great scholar from the West, has categorically stated, I would like to quote, the concept of the essential unity of mankind and of the philosophical ties which bind East and West have never been more profoundly held or more eloquently voiced than by seminal thinkers of modern India. Unquote. India provides us with a theory of nationalism which is different from the West. In the West, the contemporary debate on nationalism centers around two opposite strands, modernists versus historicists. In this all-going debate between the two, there is no reflection or even mention of spiritual nationalism, which is so deeply rooted in thinkers like Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and Mahatma Gandhi. Indian concept of nationalism does not believe nation either as an imagined community or as a historical community grown over a period of time. Rather, it believes that every nation, like an individual, has a body, an organic life, an aesthetic temperament, a developing mind, and a soul behind all these signs and powers for the sake of which they exist. This is the reason in one of the lectures, Dr. Ganeshanji was mentioning how we call it Matrabhumi. This kind of nationalism has the potential of resisting modernist models as well as of transcending the historicist models. Now coming to another debate on modernity, there are two competing conceptions of public life in the Western literature: liberal universalism and cultural distinctiveness. One seeks to promote non-discrimination in a difference-blind manner. Non-discrimination in a difference-blind manner. The other redefines non-discrimination as requiring differential treatment. In both the concepts, in both the models, the concept of other is very visible. But in India's Advaitin philosophy, the other does not exist. In the words of famous Hindi writer and poet Nirmal Verma, I would like to quote, Hindus' so-called indifference to other cultures was not so much the lack of curiosity or a smug sense of perfection, but the fact that for them, the other was never a source of reference to define their own identity, as it was for the Europeans. But the self was always accepted as self-referential. The other was neither a threat to their identity. This is very important. The other was never a threat to their identity, nor a source of confirmation of their uniqueness. Unquote. Similarly, the debates on liberty, equality, and democracy traveled a long way and ultimately reached a destination where difference is being recognized as an essential part of the above twin ideals. Yet,
Chandrakalaji, could you sum up, because we are we have only 2 minutes left. We have only 2 minutes left, and there's a vote of thanks.
Okay. I was going to ask how much minutes have left, you know. So what I'm trying to say, when we go into our own social sciences, we find that we have to depend, if we really want to build up our society, reconstruct our society, then we have to go to our own original sources, and then only we will be able to produce a social sciences which is relevant to us, which is relevant to our own people. And I must say, in this direction, this lecture series, I bow my head to Dr. Ganeshanji for uncovering so many layers of truth through which we can learn a lot. And I thank Amarjivanji to you also and to all the members of the Rashtriya Samaj Vigyan Parishad for arranging this lecture, which has been an eye-opener to me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chandrakalaji. I know when we flow, we keep on flowing. Such a beautiful ideas you are collecting. Thank you so much for your words full of pulse and gem. Now I am requesting at the end our Dr. Govind Sharma ji to have vote of
मेरा-
thanks. डॉक्टर गोविंद शर्मा जी का छोटा सा परिचय होगा पहले। गोविंद जी मुझे समय दीजिए, एक बार आपके बारे में बताना हमें बहुत जरूरी है। आप राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान परिषद के,
नहीं कोई बात नहीं,
जी बोलिए, राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान परिषद के कोषाध्यक्ष हैं जी।
मेरा सौभाग्य है कि मुझे इस विशेष मंच से धन्यवाद ज्ञापन का दायित्व सौंपा गया है। आवाज आ रही है सर?
हाँ आ रही है।
हमारे संरक्षक और मार्गदर्शक आदरणीय भाई साहब कृष्ण भट्ट जी के मार्गदर्शन में राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान परिषद पूरे देश में, राष्ट्र में समाज विज्ञान को भारतीय राष्ट्रीय परिप्रेक्ष्य में पढ़ने पढ़ाने के लिए 2010 से लगातार प्रयास कर रहे हैं। कोविड-19 के इस दौर में ये व्याख्यान श्रृंखला उन्हीं के भागीरथी प्रयासों की एक प्रमुख कड़ी है। सर्वप्रथम मैं पूरे देश में RSVP के मंच से भारतीय समाज विज्ञान की गौरव ध्वजा लहराने वाले हमारे यशस्वी मार्गदर्शक संरक्षक आदरणीय भाई साहब कृष्ण भट्ट जी का हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करता हूं कि वे तमाम व्यस्तताओं के बावजूद हमारे व्याख्यान में पूरे समय उपस्थित रहकर हमें गरिमा प्रदान करते हैं। आदरणीय भट्ट जी देश भर के विभिन्न मंचों पर राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान की समृद्ध विचारशीलता के शीर्ष प्रचारक और प्रसारक हैं। मैं आज पूर्णिमा है और हमारे लिए पिछले 4 गुरुवार पूर्णिमा जैसे ही हैं। जब ज्ञान की विराट लहरें किसी सर्वोच्च विराट को छू लेने को बेताब हो उठती हैं, मैं ऐसे आदरणीय श्री शताब्दी आर गणेश जी का आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। और आदरणीय शताब्दी गणेश जी को सुनकर, आदरणीय चंद्रकला पाड़िया जी को सुनकर मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि हर देश अपनी प्रतिभा के अनुसार ज्ञान की किस्म को विकसित कर ही लेता है। भारत ने भी ज्ञान की किस्म को विकसित किया है। जैसे कहते हैं ना कि खजाना लुट जाए तो क्या हुआ, एक दूसरा खजाना हमारे पास सदैव रहता है जिसे न तो शस्त्र छेद सकता है न आग जला सकती है, और जो खजाना हमेशा रहता है वो ज्ञान का खजाना है। तो ऐसे शताब्दी जी गणेश जी का मैं हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ। आपने जिस दृढ़ता एवं स्पष्टता के साथ भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा को प्रस्तुत किया है, उसमें स्पष्ट है कि आपके मार्गदर्शन में आने वाला समय राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान परिषद के ज्ञान विज्ञान का होगा। आपका आभार। हालांकि आदरणीय गणेश जी के लिए धन्यवाद का शब्द पर्याप्त नहीं है। मैं आज श्री माननीय आदरणीय चंद्रकला जी पाड़िया मैडम का भी धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करता हूं कि वे भारतीय चिंतन परंपरा की प्रतिनिधि विचारक हैं। मैं प्रोफेसर राजजी भाटिया का आभार व्यक्त करता हूं, जिनका नेतृत्व समाज विज्ञान परिषद के प्रति उनके गहरे लगाव को दर्शाता है। कोविड-19 के दौर में समाज विज्ञान परिषद की अकादमिक गतिविधियां जारी रहें, ऐसा प्रयास एवं मार्गदर्शन देने वाले आदरणीय भाटिया जी का धन्यवाद। और चाहे कोरों का खजाना लुट जाए, लेकिन आदरणीय भाटिया जी की कृपा से हमारा खजाना कभी रिक्त नहीं होता है। मैं राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान परिषद के अध्यक्ष आदरणीय वाजपेयी जी, महासचिव आदरणीय श्रीमती शीला राय जी को आभार व्यक्त करता हूं, जिनका मार्गदर्शन हमें सदैव मिलता है और जिनके नेतृत्व में समाज विज्ञान परिषद का परचम पूरे देश में लहरा रहा है। हालांकि आदरणीय भट्ट जी, आदरणीय भाटिया जी, आदरणीय वाजपेयी जी, आदरणीय शीला जी, आदरणीय पाड़िया जी, आदरणीय श्री गणेश जी का सहयोग शब्दों में प्रकट नहीं किया जा सकता, लेकिन फिर भी मैं धन्यवाद करना चाहूंगा। इसी के साथ दमन से भाई संजय जी, शिमला से अरुण सिंह जी, अंडमान से प्रोफेसर मूर्ति, ग्वालियर से राजेश, मुंबई से वैद्य जी का, जिन्होंने अपने व्यस्त समय में से समय निकालकर हमारी गरिमा को बढ़ाया है। मैं इस आयोजन की क्षमता पर अजय लोचन जी की छाप दिखाई दे रही है। धन्यवाद अजय जी। इस आयोजन हेतु गठित संचालन समिति एवं सदस्यों को भी हार्दिक धन्यवाद देता हूं, जिनके सुझावों एवं मार्गदर्शन से ये कार्यक्रम सफल ढंग से चल रहा है। वे सभी कार्यकर्ता बधाई के पात्र हैं। उन सभी को धन्यवाद। मैं उन सभी का धन्यवाद करता हूं जिन्होंने इस व्याख्यान श्रृंखला में परोक्ष या अपरोक्ष सहयोग प्रदान किया है। मैं उन सभी का धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करता हूं जिनके सहयोग के बिना यह व्याख्यान श्रृंखला संभव नहीं है। अंत में आशा करता हूं कि इस व्याख्यानमाला में ऐसा अमृत निकल कर आएगा जो हमारे संगठन राष्ट्रीय समाज विज्ञान परिषद के पूरे देश बल्कि विश्व में विस्तार को, देश को और दुनिया को नई पहचान देगा। धन्यवाद, अभिवादन, शुभ रात्रि।
नमस्कार सबको, धन्यवाद। अगले बृहस्पतिवार को फिर मिलेंगे हम लोग। जैसे गणेश जी ने बताया, काव्य पे चर्चा होगी, अगली बार का क्रम चलेगा और बृहस्पति का समय यही 8 बजे का रहेगा ना जी? जी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद।
कार्यक्रम की समाप्ति की आज्ञा लेता हूँ आपसे जी, सभी से नमस्कार सभी को।